Every city has a building like this one. You've probably walked past it without noticing. A mid-rise apartment block, unremarkable brick, the kind of place that blends into a skyline instead of standing out from it. This one sat on the corner of 9th and Larkspur, and its name was the Aldridge. Tonight's story is about what happened on the 4th floor of that building, in Unit 4C, and about the man who was sent there to do a job that should have taken an hour and ended up taking something from him instead. If you've ever had to clear out a space that someone left behind, a desk, a childhood bedroom, an apartment, you already know there's a particular kind of dread in touching what belongs to someone who isn't coming back. Keep that feeling in mind. It matters later. The Aldridge had been built in the 1960s, one of those solid, unglamorous brick buildings that cities are full of and no one ever really looks at twice. 6 floors, 42 units, a lobby with a mailroom that always smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. It had changed hands as a property maybe 4 or 5 times over the decades, the way buildings like this do. Bought, managed, sold again, each new owner inheriting a building full of strangers' lives without ever really knowing what had happened inside any particular unit before they arrived. Nobody who worked there thought of the Aldridge as anything other than ordinary. That's important to remember too. His name was Marcus Webb, 34 years old, a property manager for a mid-sized real estate firm that handled about a dozen buildings across the city. Marcus was not a man who believed in ghost stories. He believed in leaking pipes, unpaid rent, and the particular exhaustion of dealing with other people's problems for a living. Which is why, when his supervisor handed him the file for Unit 4C, he didn't think twice about it. "Tenant's gone," his supervisor said. "No notice, no forwarding address, 6 weeks behind on rent. Building's changing hands next month. New owners want everything cleared and relisted by Friday. Go do the walkthrough, document the unit, get it packed up." Marcus asked the obvious question. "Gone where?" His supervisor shrugged in the particular way people shrug when they'd rather not think about the answer. "Not our problem. Legally, once rent's 6 weeks late and there's no contact, we're clear to reclaim the unit. Just do the paperwork right." Marcus didn't ask again. He'd learned a long time ago that in property management, some questions weren't worth the answers. The tenant's name, according to the file, was Elena Cho, 29 years old, moved in 14 months earlier, previously always paid on time. There was nothing unusual in her file, no complaints, no noise violations, nothing that stood out. Just an ordinary tenant who had, 6 weeks ago, simply stopped existing as far as the building's records were concerned. Marcus arrived at the Aldridge on a Tuesday evening, later than he'd planned, the kind of gray dusk where streetlights haven't quite decided to turn on yet. The building's lobby was quiet, its elevator slow and rattling, and by the time he reached the 4th floor, it was fully dark outside. He knocked first, out of habit more than expectation. No answer. He knocked again, waited a full 30 seconds by his watch, then used the master key. The door to 4C swung open onto a scene that made Marcus stop in the doorway before he'd even stepped inside. The apartment was not abandoned. That was the first and most immediate thing his mind tried to process, and failed to. Every apartment he'd ever cleared out after a tenant left, skipped rent, evictions, the occasional death, had a particular look to it. Dust, stillness, the specific emptiness of a space that had been left, not lived in. This was not that. The lights in 4C were on, warm and low. There was music playing very quietly from somewhere in the back of the apartment, something instrumental, the kind of thing you'd play while cooking. And in the kitchen, visible from the doorway, there was a pot on the stove, a low blue flame beneath it, steam rising in a lazy curl toward the exhaust fan. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long moment, absolutely certain he'd made a mistake. Wrong unit, wrong building. Some clerical error that had sent him into someone else's home. He checked the number on the door. 4C. He checked the file in his hand. 4C. Elena Cho. "Hello?" he called out, stepping inside despite every instinct telling him not to. "Property management. I'm sorry to intrude." No one answered. The apartment was empty of people, but it was not empty of life, if that makes sense. Not in the way Marcus meant it when he tried to explain it to his supervisor later and failed and gave up trying. He moved through the apartment slowly, taking photos for the file the way he was supposed to, and with every room, the wrongness deepened instead of resolving into something explainable. In the living room, a book lay open on the arm of the couch, face down, a reading lamp beside it still lit. In the bedroom, the bed was unmade in the particular way beds look when someone has just gotten up from them. Not slept in and abandoned, but freshly left, sheets still holding a faint impression of a body. On the bathroom counter, a toothbrush sat in a cup, still wet. A towel hung over the shower rail, damp at the fold. Marcus stood in that small, tiled room and told himself out loud that there had to be a simple explanation. A roommate the file didn't mention, a sublet nobody had filed paperwork for, some ordinary human reason why a supposedly abandoned apartment looked more lived in than his own. He went back through the apartment slower the second time, photographing things he'd rushed past the first. A jacket on a hook by the door, keys in a small bowl on the entry table, a grocery list stuck to the fridge in handwriting that looked rushed and ordinary, the kind of list anyone might make. Milk, eggs, call the plumber about the tap. Nothing about it read as strange on its own. It was the sum of it that Marcus couldn't make sense of. 100 small, mundane proofs of an ongoing life, arranged inside an apartment that belonged, on paper, to someone who had vanished from every system that might have tracked her. Marcus checked the pot on the stove because some deeply stubborn part of his brain needed there to be a normal explanation. And normal explanations start with checking the obvious things. He lifted the lid. Some kind of soup, gently simmering, the way it looks when it's been on the heat for perhaps 20 minutes. Not old, not neglected. Cooking. He turned off the burner. His hand was not quite steady when he did it. It was in the bedroom that he found the calendar, hanging on the wall beside a small desk, the kind you buy at a stationery store, with a photograph for each month and a grid of days below it. This month's photograph was of a lake at sunrise, and beneath it, days were marked off in neat pen strokes, a small X through each date, dutifully, one after another, right up until 6 weeks ago. The exact date matched the file in Marcus's hand. The exact date rent had stopped. But it didn't stop there, on that date, the way it should have if someone had simply vanished. The X's continued, every day since, marked off in the same neat pen, right up until yesterday. Marcus stood in that bedroom for a long time, looking at a calendar that meant someone had been in this apartment every single day for 6 weeks. Cooking, reading, sleeping in that bed, marking off days, while simultaneously being a person who, according to every official record and every human being who might have looked for her, no longer existed anywhere at all. He left that night without finishing the walkthrough. He told his supervisor the unit needed more time, that there were complications, and he did not explain what he meant by that, because he did not have words that wouldn't get him sent home for a psych evaluation. He went back 3 days later, during daylight, because daylight felt like it might make a difference. It did not. He told himself, walking up those 4 flights instead of taking the slow, rattling elevator, that this time he would notice the trick of it, the seam where the illusion, or the mistake, or whatever this was, gave itself away. He was almost relieved by the thought that there might be a rational explanation waiting for him, something mundane enough to laugh about afterward. A squatter, a building super with a spare key and a grudge, anything human-sized.
The apartment looked exactly the same. Lights on low. Something new on the stove. Not soup this time. Something with the smell of roasted vegetables, still warm. The book on the couch had moved to a different page. The bed, again, freshly unmade. And on the calendar, 3 more days marked off since his last visit, in the same careful hand.
This time, Marcus noticed something he'd missed before. A small radio on the kitchen counter, the kind with a dial rather than a screen, tuned to a station playing something soft and instrumental. The same music, he realized slowly, that he'd heard faintly on his first visit. It was playing now at a volume too low to have carried down the hallway, and yet somehow he'd heard it from outside the door before he'd even used his key. He didn't try to explain that to himself. He simply noted it, the way he noted everything else, in the careful, clinical language of someone building a case file for a problem he didn't yet have a name for. Marcus began to understand, in the slow and unwilling way people understand things they very badly do not want to be true, that Elena Cho had not left this apartment. Elena Cho was still here, living some version of an ordinary life within these 4 rooms, and the reason no one had seen her, not neighbors, not the building's other staff, not the mail carrier, not anyone, was not because she was hiding. It was because, somehow, nobody could. He tested this on his 3rd visit, a week later, bringing along a colleague named Priya from the office under the pretense of needing a second set of eyes for the paperwork. He wanted, badly, for Priya to see what he saw, to have another person confirm that the apartment was inexplicably lived in, that something was deeply wrong here that had nothing to do with routine property management. Priya walked through 4C and saw an empty apartment, dust on the surfaces, a cold, dark kitchen, a bare, stripped bed. She commented that it was strange the tenant had left so much furniture behind, and asked Marcus if he was feeling all right, because he'd gone very pale and very quiet. He did not push it. He signed the paperwork Priya needed and told her he'd finish the rest alone. The moment she left, the apartment changed back. The lights warmed. Somewhere, faintly, that same quiet instrumental music resumed, as if it had never stopped, as if it had only been waiting for the wrong kind of witness to leave the room. Marcus went to the calendar again, and for the first time, he touched it, flipped back through the previous months out of some need to understand how long this had been happening and how it had started. 14 months of pages, 1 per month, each with its neat grid of dates and its careful pen strokes, going all the way back to Elena Cho's move-in date. Every single day marked, without a single day missed, for 14 months, through what should have been 6 full weeks of a total and mysterious disappearance. On the current month's page, beneath the small photograph of the lake at sunrise, he noticed something he'd missed before. In the corner, in the same neat handwriting, a single line had been added recently, in ink that looked barely dry. If you're reading this, you're the first one who's stayed long enough to notice. Please don't tell anyone else what this apartment looks like when you're inside it. It only stays real while someone's willing to see it. Marcus stood there for a long time with that line in front of him, and slowly, very slowly, he became aware of a sound behind him. Not footsteps, something closer to the sound of someone settling into a chair, the soft creak of fabric taking weight, the small of a person getting comfortable. He did not turn around immediately. When he finally did, the room behind him was empty. The book on the couch had moved to yet another page. He asked his supervisor, carefully, obliquely, what had happened to the tenant before Elena Cho in Unit 4C. His supervisor didn't remember offhand, but pulled the old file out of curiosity and found a name. A man, moved out under nearly identical circumstances 2 years before Elena Cho ever moved in. Unpaid rent, no contact, no forwarding address. The unit had simply been relisted, cleaned, and rented again, the same way units always are.
Marcus asked to see that tenant's forwarding information on the off chance there was something, anything, that might make sense of what he'd seen. There wasn't. But there was, tucked in the very back of that old file, a single Polaroid photo that had apparently been left behind during that unit's final walkthrough 2 years earlier, filed and forgotten. It was a photo of the apartment's living room, taken by whoever had done the walkthrough back then. Lived in, warm lamplight, a book face down on the arm of the couch. Marcus never finished the paperwork on Unit 4C. He requested a transfer to a different building, citing personal reasons he didn't elaborate on, and his supervisor, sensing something in his tone that discouraged follow-up questions, didn't push it.
Records show Unit 4C was relisted within 2 weeks. Its previous tenant's file quietly closed out as an unresolved skip, one of a few dozen such cases that get filed away every year in a city this size and never looked at again. Marcus still lives in the same city. He does not work in property management anymore. He took a job doing something quieter, something that doesn't involve keys to other people's homes. And he tells people, when they ask why he left a stable career so abruptly, that he simply needed a change. It's not a lie, exactly. It's just not the whole answer. He sometimes wonders about the person renting 4C now, whether they know what they're actually living inside, whether they've noticed the days marked carefully on a calendar they don't remember buying, whether they've caught, once or twice, the sound of someone settling into a chair in a room they thought was empty. He wonders, too, whether that new tenant has started leaving out small things of their own without quite meaning to. A grocery list, a book left open, a pot left simmering a little too long. The ordinary debris of a life that is, in its own way, being asked to keep proving itself real. He never went back to check. Some part of him understands that if he did, and if he saw that the lights were on, and the pot was on the stove, and the book had moved another page, he might be expected, this time, to stay. If you ever find yourself clearing out a space someone left behind, and it doesn't look like they left at all, the meal still warm, the bed still holding its shape, the pages of a calendar marked further than they should be, you might want to consider not staying long enough to be sure. Some places don't need a person to keep living in them. They only need a witness who's willing to believe they do. This has been a Whisper Dark original. If this one got under your skin, you know what to do. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the dark next time.